While the Iliad was kept as a battlefield manual by Alexander the Great and was carried with him in a sealed treasure box during the greatest campaign of its time, the epic of Odysseus's decade-long return from a decade-long siege is not about clashing empires and warring kings. And though it is a journey on the sea, it is not geographical in its deepest essence. It describes an internal voyage as a returning soldier searches for his own peace and strives to transform his energies in order to re-engage with society and with domestic life. It is a song of growth and renewal, an endlessly layered collection of folklore, allegories, and astronomical references forged into a coherent narrative by the repeated performances of generations of bards. A diamond polished by criticism, a gemstone on the crown of Western tradition, fit into place by Homer's poetic genius to serve as a blueprint for all following hero stories. To look at myth as factual history and, for example, start searching for the stations of Odysseus's voyage on a map is like trying to understand the message of a painting by examining the chemical composition of its paint. While looking at the Odyssey, this essay will mainly follow an approach that treats mythological stories and folktales as the collective projections of the social dramas of the individual, as inner conflicts articulated and brought to life by the use of the images and symbols of the given culture. As most of the ancient allegories of the Odyssey are blended into each other and can be interpreted in multiple ways, I hit some of Odysseus's ordeals from multiple angles, while for some I will mention only the most personally interesting explanation. At the same time, I follow the classic course of the heroic transformation which has been laid down by the interpretations of Joseph Campbell. Sing to Me of the Man, Muse, starts off the epic, and starts off Odysseus's symbolical journey towards fulfillment, and the transformation of a boy to a man, a soldier to a husband, and a warrior to a king. The source of the inner voice, or in other words one's conscience, is repeatedly personified as a companion in world literature and in myth, as for example Faust's Mephistopheles, or Dante's Virgil, or referred to as Socrates' Daimon, or the Way of the Tao. The voice of a fuller life, of hidden potential, as it surfaces from beneath the threshold of apparent conscious awareness, and helps to generate the realizations necessary for growth. This inner companion in the Odyssey is personified by Athena, the goddess of wisdom. The epic begins with her appeal before Zeus, the All-Father, the universe, at the assembly of the gods, raising the case of helping Odysseus home. She states that the exile must return as an expression for the formulation of the deep conviction that there is more to life than the present, maybe inefficient or exhausted state, that the current patterns of his behavior do not result in the expected outcomes, the realization of the need for personal transformation. After the assembly of the gods, Athena descends to meet Telemachus, Odysseus' son in Ithaca, and Zeus sends Hermes to the nymph Calypso, who holds Odysseus captive. Hermes is the god of roads, and he also serves as the guide to the underworld, as a companion towards death and rebirth. He is the helper and the protector of Odysseus before he reaches Ithaca. Athena and Hermes are often depicted together by the sculptors of the classic age, as their godly powers are the two alternate versions of the same quality. Athena is the god of wisdom and strategy, while Hermes rules over the darker aspects as the god of finesse and stealth. They represent Odysseus's greatest characteristic, the ancient virtue, Medes, cunning and wisdom combined. While Athena is an ally in waking life, Hermes instructs and guides Odysseus in the realm of dreams. The narrative begins in the middle of the plot, and in the center of the hero's world, on Ithaca. Athena finds Telemachus in grief, surrounded by his mother's suitors. The kingdom is torn by entropy, its rule is decentralized, and its king is deemed dead. The goddess appears in the form of a traveler who resembles Odysseus, and sparks the realization in the boy that if he waits for longer, things will only get worse, and that he must grow to action. After getting motivated by the stranger, Telemachus confronts his mother and her suitors by saying, "I hold the reins of power in this house," and declares his claim for the throne. Intuition became action, and at the same time as Odysseus is set free from Calypso, Telemachus sets on his own journey to seek his father's whereabouts and to find his own manhood in the process. The epic plays from the masculine perspective, and one of its central themes is the symbolic demonstration of the dynamics between the two sexes. It presents a society where the gender roles were very much established and rigid, though I don't see the Odyssey as a song for flat-out patriarchy. What cannot be said about the Iliad? The concept that the epic draws is that men write the course of the world, while men's course is written by women. Penelope's waiting for a soldier's uncertain return implies the origin of a warrior society where this representation was in demand, and throughout most of the story, she stays in the background as a permeating influence, as the feminine in its purest form. The figure of Odysseus's wife symbolizes the so-desired peace for the man lost at sea. Their proper union is home. Her strength consists not in bloodshed, but in her indirect influence on the hero, and in her ability to control the main events of the story covertly, to pull strings behind the curtains that the men are unaware of, to use her feminine traits to reach her own triumph. Penelope famously weaves the funeral shroud for her father-in-law, advised by Athena, and gives the conditions to her suitors, that she chooses between them when it is finished. While she works on it during the day, she unravels it under the cover of night. While Odysseus is searching out the pathways of the sea, she weaves and reweaves her patterns to buy time for herself and her husband to reunite. In an astronomical sense, Odysseus is a solar hero, a mythological year king, endowed with attributes of the cycles of the sun. He owns a cattle of 360 animals, of which each day one is eaten by the suitors. He descends to the underworld on the west and rises on the extreme east. His death comes to him from out of the sea. He is destined to be slain by his own son, and so on. Penelope's act of weaving and unweaving, on the other hand, is an allegory for the cycles of the moon. The absence of Odysseus, as suggested by Gilbert Murray, can be an allegory for the Metonic cycle, a 19-year-long astronomical period, which was widely used for ancient calendars. Each Metonic cycle ends when the new moon coincides with the new sun of the winter solstice. This alignment is referred to as the meeting of sun and moon. In this sense, they both symbolize celestial objects, as Penelope the lunar heroine waving and unweaving her patterns, while Odysseus the solar hero is on the return. Odysseus is an accomplished war hero, a tactician and a negotiator, who tried to trick himself out of going to the Trojan War by feigning lunacy, and it was his wooden horse plan that eventually took the city. After his material victories, now it is a moral victory he must achieve. The raider of cities must conquer himself. Athena's call at the assembly of the gods can be interpreted as a call of nature and society, as it arises within the hero, and urges him towards the fulfillment of a higher potential. Odysseus is a detached and distant war veteran, and this call may be the manifestation of his purpose, to reconnect with his family and with society in the right manner, thus to step into a new stage of his life. The hero returns from a 10-year-long leave. His return to a completely different social setting is slow and painful. He pillages the first city on his way home, and as a consequence, Zeus's storm, a howling demonic gale, throws his whole fleet off course. As the night swept down from the sky, Odysseus enters into the sealed realm of dreams and abstraction, to the sphere of metaphorical creatures and encounters where each island is a trial of his character, a state of mind, or an experience to live through in order to gain a greater understanding. It is the Sea of Poseidon, out of geographical space and time, where his voyage is a collection of the symbolic depictions of the patterns of the fundamental human struggles which accompany personal transformations in the process of individuation. In his beautiful essay, Bela Hamvas describes Poseidon as the ancient god of unbridled energies, of both physical and inner depth, the earth-shaker, as Homer calls him. Poseidon is a determining entity who rules his domain with the trident, the three-piked handlebar of the world. With his weapon in hand, he picks, disturbs, and tears up all that is thought to be absolute, shakes all that is thought to be unshakable. He challenges the arrogant, he puts the wise in doubt. He may symbolize both the threatening abyss and the promising potential on the far horizon of a yet unmapped territory. His kingdom of endless potential and variation serves as a sphere within which Odysseus's personal transformation can play out. After the great storm, the fleet washes up on the shores of the Lotus-eaters. Here's Odysseus's opportunity to refuse his call home and to stay in a place of ignorance, to look the other way, and to live in refusal with the Lotus-eaters, who are referred to by some as the users of opium. This station is an allegory for the first thing one might do to eliminate the urge for change and of taking personal responsibility by turning to distractions or simple pleasures as a substitute. This ordeal has also been referred to be the beginning of a transformative psychedelic experience. Odysseus forces his crew to continue, and they sail to the island of the Cyclops, the island that marks the first stage of the hero's transformation. The Cyclops Polyphemus is an uncivilized, single-sided, infantile giant who may represent the hero's own unrecognized and unattended qualities, which he must voluntarily face in order to find his way back to civilization. By crossing the threshold of the monster's dark cave, Odysseus, just like Alice in her rabbit hole, begins a learning maturation process through which he breaks down and reconstructs his identity, a process of which entrance is guarded by the single-eyed monster. When Polyphemus asks his name, Odysseus introduces himself as Nemo, which means nobody or nomen. With this act, he leaves behind his secular identity, as from here on he encounters a variety of spiritual and transpersonal forces, over which his ego has no control. Here, at the first threshold, Odysseus must show himself ready and worthy for the upcoming challenges. Thus, this ordeal demands him to showcase his best qualities, his cunning, his speechcraft, and his resourcefulness. He gets the Cyclops drunk, pierces his eye, and escapes the cave holding on to the belly of rams. Entering a dark cave, defeating a monster, and escaping at dawn is one of the many death and rebirth motifs of the epic. While on the ship escaping, he turns back and, blinded by his pride, reveals and parades his name to the also blind Polyphemus. All this does that it brings all the upcoming troubles on his own head, as the Cyclops ask his father Poseidon to avenge him. Odysseus is now a nobody, sailing on the sea of infinite potential, and must find his way back to himself. In some regards, this is Odysseus's hardest challenge of them all, and he refers back to it many times throughout his journey. The island may stand as an allegory for a hard and decisive deed, of stepping out of the old and stepping into the unknown. The Cyclops myth is also an independent myth of its own, which is connected by the natural scientist Othenio Abel to the scattered skulls of an extinct elephant species across the Greek islands. From Aeolus, the keeper of winds, Odysseus acquires a bag that holds all winds except Zephyrus, the west wind. With this help, he gets so close to Ithaca that he can see its guard fires, but then exhausted and thinking that he has already arrived, he goes to sleep. Each time Odysseus loses awareness while at sea, it is his men who take over. This suggests that when the guiding principle is at sleep, impulsive action and spontaneity become dominant. Odysseus's crew is undisciplined and envious, and they are repeatedly misled by their greed, hunger, thirst, and sexual drive. The higher understanding the hero gains, the more he loses touch with them, before the recklessness of their own ways destroyed them all. His crew can be interpreted as insufficient parts of Odysseus himself, which he must eventually leave behind in order to fit back into society, to spiritually develop, and to become a self-possessed individual. While Odysseus sleeps, they open the bag of winds in hope of treasure, and they get blown back to the open sea. They then return to Aeolus, who denies helping them again and sends them away. By overcoming the first challenge, Odysseus thought that he had already reached the end of his struggles, while in truth, the journey had hardly begun. Continuing without the winds, they arrive at the island of the giant people called Laestrygonians, who devastate the party and brutally destroy all but one of Odysseus's ships. Odysseus's self-divestiture is a group divestiture as well, and after the spirited, overly optimistic social inflation comes deflation, depression, and humiliation. He is gradually losing all of his company as he bears down to his fundamentals. Eventually, with one ship as a gnomon, he arrives on the island of Aae, the island of the first nymph, Circe. In order to properly re-engage with his wife, Odysseus must be tempered, so to say, which means that he must learn to confront women and reunite with the feminine principle. Circe is surrounded by tamed wolves and lions, and she enchants his crew with her potion, the Koukeon. She transforms them into swine, which may be an allegory for the triumph of their bestial instincts over their reason. They are subordinated by the feminine and led into a pen by the witch. Odysseus is able to break the nymph's spell with a weed, a herb of virtue that he receives from Hermes, who appears to him on his way as he sets to free his men. Circe strikes with her wand and tries to lead Odysseus into a pen as well, but the hero pulls his blade in defense. This ordeal is a standoff between the two sexes, as in Circe, Odysseus found his equal. Here the hero learns that the proper masculine character is not about the overpowering and the possession of the other, as seen in the Iliad, nor the complete subordination of his powers. By finding the right degree of force and resistance, his aggression is turned to eros, and he is properly initiated into sexuality. Circe's island is also the island of pleasure, which holds the trial of the disappearance of self-interest and willful action by indulging in sensual pleasures. Odysseus forgets about his home and his wishes, and stays on the island for a whole year before his comrades remind him of his ambitions. There's a lot of cynical critique on how Odysseus's supposed disloyalty and relation to women is a justification for man's disloyalty from a civilization less advanced than ours. That the message of the poem is somehow that the more women one has a sexual relationship with, the more heroic his life becomes. These interpretations completely miss the point. Circe and Calypso are both goddesses, so by definition, they are ever-present and outlive individuals. They are both at first hostile and later helpers, both forced to make a vow not to harm the hero in exchange for his trust, and the spell of both is broken by the intervention of Hermes, who enchants the eyes of men or wakes us up from sleep. The nymphs are but tools to showcase instinctual, unconscious tendencies that the hero encounters in confrontation with the feminine. And as he integrates these elements, they turn on his side and help him on his journey. His ordeals with Circe, Calypso, and Nausicaa can be interpreted as the depictions of the different aspects of affection in relation to the same person, Penelope, or as abstracted and generalized depictions of women in relation to men. The two nymphs and Nausicaa can also be looked at as Jungian anima figures, the unconscious feminine sides of a man, which he must encounter and integrate in order to have a more grounded, a better realized character. In Joseph Campbell's interpretation of the story, the three women who Odysseus meets on the sea are the same female figures who presented themselves to Paris of Troy in the form of Aphrodite, Hera, and Athena. Women as they appear in a man's life, namely the seductress, the wife, and the daughter. It is only after these inductions of the male in union with the female and the canceling of ego, fixation, and self-interest that the man is truly open for compassion, and only after Odysseus has been introduced into these female energies, engaged with these Jungian anima figures, that he is ready to properly re-engage with his wife. On the island of pleasure, Odysseus lost his way, forgot his ambitions, and to find his direction he must deliberately descend into the underworld for guidance. He must reconnect with his deepest resources to reintroduce meaning to his struggles and to find the answers that help him forward. The hero's disappearance in the ancestral realm, his descending into the belly of the beast, is the most commonly reoccurring archetypal narrative, which is the part of every hero's story. With the words of Carl Jung, the night sea journey is a kind of descensus ad inferos, a descent into Hades and a journey to the land of ghosts, somewhere beyond this world, beyond consciousness, hence an immersion in the unconscious. The night sea journey may stand as an allegory for the complete withdrawal of interest from the outer world in order to readjust the internal conditions. It is in this dark and distant place, away from society, where the principles of new behavior are laid down and where higher personal and spiritual goals are set or realized. Odysseus is mainly in the ancestral realm to seek guidance from the blind seer Tiresias, the only living amongst the dead. Homer doesn't bother to expand on Tiresias's backstory, as these characters and their stories were deeply embedded in the culture and in the everyday language of their times. Tiresias is known for living part of his life as a man and part of his life as a woman. And within this story, he may personify the main underlying motif of the poem, an established harmony between the two sexes as equals of opposites. Odysseus performs the rite of Nicaea to call forward and question the ghost of the past. He must face his past by meeting with his dead brothers in arms. He also meets with the ghost of his mother, who tells him about the situation in Ithaca and fills him with hope. In the underworld, he receives the advice to go home under disguise, to not eat from the flock of Helios, and most importantly, in order to have a long life and a gentle, painless death, to pick up a rowing paddle after he won back his kingdom and keep walking inland until people start calling it a fan to winnow grain, trust it in the ground there, and make a sacrifice to Poseidon. In the depths of Hades, Odysseus receives a higher purpose, which puts his mission into a greater context. An adventure boundless, laden with danger, great and long, that in extent justifies and matches his present struggles on the sea. It also indicates that his struggles won't end with his current goals completed, and he must eventually embark on another journey. The Odyssey is the portrait of change. The symbols of transformation, of death and rebirth, are apparent in almost every line as the hero develops and goes through the challenges which prepare him for his return. Taking a bath, oiling, changing clothes, sleeping, and the coming of the dawn with her rose-red fingers, just as the frequent crossing and standing on doorsteps and thresholds are all motifs that accompany spiritual growth. Odysseus's journey to Hades is framed by his interactions with Circe, which suggests that many meaningful personal realizations happen in the context of romantic love. When he asks for direction, Circe says, "Let no lack of a pilot at the helm concern you. No, just step your mast and spread your white sail wide. One will get there without navigation, as it is not a place but a state of mind." The trip to Hades begins on the island of Aeaea, with the unnoticed accidental death of Elpenor, one of Odysseus's men who drank too much quotations. Elpenor is also the first ghost Odysseus meets in the underworld, and the journey closes with burying him on arrival back to the island. Circe then prepares Odysseus for his upcoming new challenges and blows wind into his mast as he sails off to the Island of the Sun. Odysseus's descent to the underworld, the most prominent death and rebirth motif of the poem, can also be connected to the Eleusinian mysteries, a popular but discreet celebration held to worship the gods Demeter and Persephone. A celebration of death and rebirth, where the sacrificial animal was the pig and they drank quotations, a brew spiked with ergot, fungi with psychedelic properties. Also, the initiation ceremony took place underground. In this sense, Odysseus's journey to Hades can be the depiction of a transformative psychedelic experience, and Tiresias, the seer to whom, even in death, Persephone has given wisdom, can refer to somebody who has already gone under the famous initiation ritual, of which Odysseus's trip may be a reference to. After Odysseus emerges from hell reformed, he faces a line of disciplinary challenges in order to reach the Island of the Sun. In myth and fairy tales, the image of the sun symbolizes royal power, self-generating radiance, immortality, and spiritual luminosity. Him being a solar hero, the arrival may mean a form of unity, an arrival to himself. Odysseus shoots towards his spiritual peak by asceticism, the practice of willed introversion. All that comes to pass on the fertile earth, we know it all. The sirens sing and try to lure him into his death. He puts wax into the ears of his crew and orders them that the stronger temptations become, the stronger they tie him to his mast. This is a description of conscious self-denial and the ability to withstand sensual temptations in order to fulfill a higher spiritual ambition. Leaving the sirens behind, he must choose between sailing across the clashing rocks or across the two monsters, Scylla and Charybdis. He chooses the latter. Scylla is a six-headed monster in a rock cave, and Charybdis is a sucking and pushing whirlpool. In the context of the story, they may represent the Apollonian and the Dionysian impulses, the opposing poles of solid reason and logic, and the whirlpool of emotions and mysticism. The hero must keep his course between the interplay of these impulses. After crossing the strait and losing 6 men to the Scylla, they finally arrive on the Island of the Sun, where the company is stuck as there are no favorable winds. Here, similarly to the ordeal with the bag of winds, Odysseus falls asleep while his man does the only thing that they were forbidden to do, and they eat the cattle of Helios. If we take a step back for a better view, it becomes clear that this whole section is but an allegorical depiction of the efforts of a man who seeks fulfillment by spiritual means, but loses to his earthly needs and urges. He breaks concentration and thus loses control over his impulses. When the favorable winds return and they set sail, Zeus struck all of Odysseus's men dead with a lightning bolt, destroys his ship, and throws him back to the monster Charybdis. Here the hero hangs above the monster's vortex by holding onto a fig tree, which he cannot climb higher nor descend from. The fig tree is a strong symbol, as for example the Buddha was enlightened while sitting under a sacred fig, and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil in the biblical paradise is also assumed to be a fig tree. As the tree that blossoms inwards, it is the symbol of internal illumination. The act of climbing up and down on a tree is significant too, as in the shamanic tradition the shaman climbed up and down on a spirit tree to consult with the deities of his tribe. At this point, the hero has reached the climax of his spiritual journey. Odysseus's voyage is not about a swift arrival to some previously promised comfort without a sense of identity and to be tranquilized by the trivial, the arrival with the bag of winds, nor is it about withdrawing himself from society and to live as a sage or a pillar saint, the island of the sun, but to re-engage with himself, with his family, with society, and to take his place among his peers as a complete, well-rounded individual. If the Odyssey would be the story of a Siddhartha or another Eastern yogi, the hero would have stayed on the island of the sun and lived enlightened as a happy nobody. If he would be a modern Christian hero, he would have sacrificed his life for his comrades, thus transcend. But Odysseus is none of those. He is an ancient Greek veteran who searches for his home, for his new place of belonging. He takes the journey from the uncivilized towards the communal. His great transcendence resides in his Nostos, in his successful homecoming. He lets go of the branch when the Charybdis vomits the waters outwards, and through 10 lonely days, he floats back the way he came, and shipwrecks on the island of the second nymph, Calypso. On the island of Ogygia, Odysseus washes up alone and in need. This is also an island of pleasure. It is also ruled by a beautiful nymph, but the hero's stay here is not voluntary. He spends 7 years on the island as the unwilling lover alongside lover all too willing. On the island of Ogygia, Odysseus is offered to become a god, to become immortal, and to marry Calypso, a young and beautiful goddess. He is tempted by an ultimate ideal, but he does not succumb. It is here where Odysseus overcomes his greatest challenge and ultimately accepts the imperfections of worldly existence and makes peace with his own mortality. Here the narrative arrives back to the beginning lines of the epic. After the assembly of the gods, Athena descends to Ithaca to move Telemachus, while Hermes, who wakes us up from sleep, flies to Calypso with the order to let Odysseus go. From the perspective of Telemachus, this act is his initiation into manhood, as a god who resembles his father sends him on a journey away from the country which raised him. The son starts searching for his father at the same time as the figure of the father is released from the grasp of a nymph, whose name literally means to conceal. For Odysseus, the island of Ogygia may also symbolize a possessive and unfunctional relationship that is based on sensual pleasures and appearances and fails to fulfill his spiritual needs. The refusal of immortality and godhood can be a metaphor for the refusal of an ideal of perfection in order to allow the hero to establish an intimate relationship with his wife, one that is based on realistic expectations. He refuses the gift of immortality, and thus chooses death and all worldly struggles along with it. He crosses a threshold towards true human connection. As I already mentioned, the two nymphs are in no sense humans, but symbolic tools to represent different aspects of affection and yet unrecognized tendencies between the sexes. In some sense, they are the shadow sides of love, personified. Circe, the enchantress of lust and passion, who can turn warriors into animals, and whose pleasures can make one forget about themselves, their goals and ambitions. And Calypso, the possessive and spoiling aspect of love. She is also a mild manifestation of Jung's devouring mother archetype, the tendency to overprotect a loved one, thus holding them back from their free growth towards becoming a sovereign individual. The symbol of the hero is but a vehicle to represent the long, difficult, and painful learning process in confrontation with these fundamental aspects of human nature. Odysseus continues his journey on a newly built raft, following the stars, and he is supported by the right winds blown by Calypso. But before he can reach Ithaca, he must face Poseidon's great storm. He is about to leave the realm of dreams and magic. The storm almost kills him and throws him half dead and naked to the utopian island of Phaeacia. Odysseus is pessimistic, broken, and closer to death than back in the land of the dead, as he is losing his drive. He is at his wit's end. He makes a bed out of leaves under the intermingled branches of one wild and one well-bred oil tree that grows from the same trunk, and he passes out as Athena showers sleep upon his eyes. Sleeping naked and buried is an unmistakable symbol of death and rebirth, and of a new beginning for Odysseus. The tree can be a reference to his actual bed, a symbol of commitment, which is also crafted from an oil tree, and the intermingled branches of the two qualities may refer to an agreement between his old and his new states of being, as the veteran's barbaric and aggressive tendencies are fully integrated. He wakes from the bushes to meet Nausicaa, the princess of the island, who presents yet another aspect of love. It is a description of mutual admiration, respect, and friendship. She is immortal, and their love remains platonic. Odysseus is offered to stay on the island and marry the princess, but he refuses and wishes her his own ideal. No finer, greater gift in the world than that. When man and woman possess their home, two minds, two hearts that work as one, despair to their enemies, a joy to all their friends, their own best claim to glory. This station marks the end of the heroic transformation that started by stepping into the cave of the Cyclops. Odysseus's transformation from a detached, arrogant veteran to a sensible father and a husband started on the island of Polyphemus, the grim loner, dead set in his own lawless ways, and now ends on Phaeacia, what is described as a blossoming civilization where he is celebrated and welcomed. Odysseus's whole voyage is a story of remembrance, told to the queen and king of this island. He cries as a blind bard sings about his heroic deeds in Troy, those deeds being the main reason for his arrogance and hubris and pain. Then at last he stands up and declares his name and reclaims his identity. He recollects what he learned, and with his powers transformed, his aggression disciplined, he is finally ready to step foot on his beloved island. His wanderings were but a necessary exile that he must suffer in order to arrive at his true destination, to return to society, and to be able to experience a genuine connection with his loved ones. From the nobles of the island, he receives gifts and treasures which equal his spoils of Troy. Though up to now sleep caused him to get thrown back to sea, now he falls to the soundest oblivion, the sleep of death itself, as the Phaeacians escort him home and put him on shore. The returning ship which carried him is turned to stone by Poseidon, and that very moment great Odysseus woke from sleep on native ground at last. Odysseus has arrived and is awake, but Ithaca is covered in a dense fog. He doesn't recognize the island and starts to explore it with expectations of new terrors. Now that he is awake, it is Athena and not Hermes who appears to him. After testing Odysseus's wit as a shepherd boy, she shows herself in her true godly form, as a woman in armor, and lifts the fog that surrounds the hero. From here on, Athena and Odysseus work and plan together, wisdom and awareness, intuition and will, aligned. Among his struggles, he found certainty. His agonies brought him to reason. Odysseus has found an ally within. Odysseus is now back in the realm of social and domestic realities, where he must put to test what he learned. Athena transforms the king into a beggar, a nobody in his own kingdom. As a newcomer in his own domain, he starts to observe and size the loyalty of his people. On meeting with his loyal swineherd, Odysseus, the great teller of tales, tells one of his many origin stories to cover his real identity. This made-up tale is a hole on the cloud of myth where the rays of true circumstance shine through. It explains a journey of physical and mental struggles, war, slavery, plunder, betrayal, hunger, and chance. It makes one wonder how a real homecoming from a real war must have been, without all the magical elements. Simultaneously to his arrival, Telemachus escapes the plot of the suitors and returns home as well. Odysseus then reveals his identity to his son, and the two set to liberate the castle. The return takes place early morning at the last visible crescent of the waning moon, just before the winter solstice celebration of the god Apollo. Arriving at his castle as a beggar, Odysseus is continually ridiculed and attacked by the suitors and by his own servants. He is humiliated and provoked into a fistfight with another beggar. Though the heart inside him growled low with rage, he forces his spirit into submission. As these are not the tests of his authority or strength, but of his self-control and patience, which he trained through his whole journey. Before slaughtering the suitors, Odysseus holds back the actions of both himself and the willing Telemachus on multiple occasions. While preparing for the massacre, they empty all the weapons from the Great Hall at night, and as a sign of the higher self and intelligence at work, Athena irradiates the palace with divine light. Odysseus shuns his son's excitement one last time. Everything is set for the final battle. When all gathered, Athena inspires Penelope to place the bow among the suitors, to test their skill and bring their slaughter on. The test is to string the bow and shoot through the holes of 12 axes, which is also the number of the hero's trials on the sea. After all the unworthy suitors fail, Odysseus does it with ease. Odysseus stringing up his bow is a similar act to King Arthur pulling his sword from the stone. He found his inherent strength, a weapon that only he can wield. He finally returned to himself. The nobody has become a king. The bow is an important symbol as it is Odysseus's favorite weapon, a family relic that he never took outside of his kingdom. It is the weapon of the god of light Apollo, the weapon of logic and aim. This is the moment Odysseus restlessly waited since his visit to the Underworld, a supper in broad daylight, as he calls it. The hero's time in his castle as a beggar and this hard-won battle may stand as the clear encounter, whereby applying the lessons learned on the journey, he has the chance to redeem himself and his kingdom. It is the act of St. George defeating the dragon. In the astronomical sense, as a solar hero, by shooting through the 12 holes, Odysseus demonstrates the sun's passage through the 12 months, or zodiacs, of a full solar year, thus justifying his rightful claim for the throne. After slaughtering the suitors and all who prayed against his return, Odysseus purges his palace halls and court with cleansing fumes, then washes and calls for his wife who slept through the massacre. Purifications, washing, cleansing, etc., constitute rites of separation from previous surroundings. There follow rites of incorporation. Penelope does not jump into his husband's arms without being sure of his true identity, and she asks him to move their wedding bed out of their room. Odysseus bursts out in fury, telling that he crafted the bed out of the trunk of an oil tree and he built their room around it. It is the symbol of their deep-rooted love and commitment toward each other. Reunited, they both tell about their struggles as Athena lengthens the night for them. Odysseus states that their hardships are not over, and that this peace is momentary, as he shall fulfill the purpose that he was given by Tiresias in the Underworld. With the two united, the soldier's transformation and the hero's journey is complete. Odysseus faced and overcame his crippling tendencies, learned the lessons demanded by his development, and aligned himself with a higher purpose, thus returned to society and reunited with Penelope and Telemachus. Sun and moon rise together once again. The first day of the 20th year has arrived. The astronomical cycle is complete. The next day, in the last chapter, which is thought to be a later edition, they have to face all the armies of the relatives of the dead suitors. Athena, in the form of mentor and ally, makes peace between them and tells Odysseus to call a halt to the great leveler, war. Zeus approves this by sending a flash of lightning from the sky. The universe sanctioned the return. There is order and harmony in the kingdom of Ithaca, until on Odysseus's already mentioned second journey, the need shall arise for Athena's next visit to Zeus. Many have tried to connect both the Iliad and the travels of Odysseus to actual historical facts and events. The most famous is Heinrich Schliemann, the German merchant who, out of pure love and fascination with the Iliad and the Homeric language, rediscovered the site of Troy in Asia Minor. While chemists try to guess if Helen's drug of the heart's ease was opium or not, and botanists try to identify the herb given by Hermes, the real essence of the Odyssey and the true value of myth lies not in their historical accuracy, but in their function. The tale of this persevering Bronze Age hero is an ancient allegory for a man's quest for self-identity, purpose, man adulthood, intimacy, and an established place among his peers as an individual. A timeless theme of hero stories, and a fundamental journey which each must walk for themselves. The story is especially popular amongst travelers, veterans, immigrants, and refugees, as it offers a narrative to contextualize their alienating experiences and traumas. The poem works on multiple layers simultaneously as it presents the processes of reinitiation of a soldier into society, the initiation of a boy into manhood, the initiations of marriage, and the dynamics of individuation. As the experiences of these strivings are unique for each individual, myths, fairy tales, and hero stories function as the tools to elevate these deeply personal matters to the level of abstraction, where they can intimately resonate with the broader community, thus collect and communicate the behavioral patterns and the values that are necessary for the thriving and survival of the group. As a collection of folk tales, the Odyssey is not the product of one person, but of the collective spirit of a community. Penelope and Odysseus can be looked at as representatives of the ideal woman and man from an age where the experience of warfare was as an essential part of adulthood for men, as childbirth was for women, both in the intensity of experience and in the risk of dying. Penelope, the faithful wife and mother who waits for a soldier's return while raising their son and running the household, and Odysseus, the loyal man of resources and finesse, who always makes his way home regardless of the obstacles. Over almost 3 millennia, Odysseus's journey became synonymous with all human journeys, be it physical or spiritual. As a result of its sophistication and depth, each century interprets it to its own image, and some refer to it as the narrative of the original striving of humanity. The Homeric language strokes a string that runs through the soul of all generations, disregarding space and time, as it is deeply archetypal and uses images and narratives that communicate with our most profound, thus most permanent elements as humans. Elements that are deeply social in origin and won't change just because one reads it from a smartphone instead of a clay tablet. Mythologies are bottomless sources of covert wisdom made to bring forth basic and inherent truths regarding the human condition, and their robust gates gladly open before all who look up to the night sky and among planets, gas giants, and satellites still have a ready eye to see the stars.